Ed, Ed, and Eddy. I've talked about this show before on Movie Pond Reviews, but truthfully, I don't think I did the series its due justice. So, for a while, I've been toying with the idea of reviewing the entire series, but so many videos have been made already, it's hard to find anything new to say about it. And then I realized, why don't I just rank the episodes? Nobody's done that yet. Now, I am going to start off by ranking each season individually, before ranking the full series. Simply because I think each season is distinct enough in quality to warrant a standalone discussion for each. But for now, let's talk about where it all began. Season 1. The general consensus seems to be that it's somewhere in the middle. It is definitely one of the weaker seasons as it was just starting out, but it also leans towards being one of the stronger seasons as it gave us a lot of classic episodes. And in my humble opinion, season 1 of Ed, Ed, and Eddy is pretty solid all things considered. Heck, there's at least 4 episodes that would easily make my personal top 10 for the series, and only 1 episode I'd call objectively bad. So yes, Ed, Ed, and Eddy had a pretty strong start. With that said, let's begin this shiz and our long journey through the many, many misadventures.
Boo! You stink!
Nagged to Ed is just pure, unadulterated
ass!
I remember not caring for this episode when I was younger, but man, this episode is so much worse on rewatch. For anyone who doesn't know, this is the second episode of season 1, and the second episode of the series overall. But it's also most notable as being the first episode to introduce the Canker sisters. I'm not a big fan of the Cankers, and I can say without a doubt their worst appearances were in season 1. And this is one of them. Okay, to be fair, I did enjoy the first half quite a bit, where they're going on an adventure in the woods. But once the Cankers come along, that's where the episode gets really, really uncomfortable. We just spend the entire episode in this dirty mobile home while the Cankers try to turn the Eds into their unofficial husbands. All while the latter are oblivious to this fact, including morally right, always attentive Double D. Now, I don't want to get up onto my soapbox, but it needs to be said. While the Cankers have had a couple good episodes, more often than not, their only shticks are to either come in at the last minute to easily defeat the Eds in whatever it is they're doing, or to simply just molest them. With the latter, I never found it funny, I will never find it funny, and now that I've seen Happy Sugar Life, it will never be funny. And the worst part? Their mere appearances tend to either bring down a lot of good episodes, or serve to make a lot of lesser episodes even worse. In this case, it's the latter. It had a good beginning, but that does not save the episode. If I'm being honest though, this episode wouldn't be at the bottom spot, as there is at least one episode I find to be technically worse than this one. But considering the nasty legacy it left on what is without a doubt the most important show of my childhood, it definitely deserves to be at the bottom.
I don't know what I've been told. Navy wings are made of gold.
Oath to an Ed is just a really mediocre episode. It's just the Eds looking for new clothes to replace the ones they destroyed, so they try and fail to become urban rangers. That is a very tenuous reason for the Eds to do this. And while there are fun gags throughout, it's just really repetitive, because outside of a few others, the only joke they ever do is the Eds are incompetent at doing their menial tasks and get no badge because of it. Rinse and repeat. At least with Nag to Ed, there is more than just one joke happening throughout the episode. It also gets worse when you look at the later seasons, as it becomes hard to believe that the Eds are incapable of doing these menial tasks, when they themselves are able to do things 100 times greater than this. You're telling me the people who made functioning machines and entire cities can't microwave a simple burrito?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Personally, I think it would have worked better if the Eds were trying to get the Urban Ranger uniforms just to show off, because it would make their constant failures more satisfying and hilarious to watch. But even with that said, that doesn't fix just how repetitive and predictable it is. And while the Urban Rangers would go on to feature in much better episodes, this episode deserves no badge.
I wish that I could be like the cool kids, like the cool kids.
Second verse, same as the first. I mean, it is the first episode to establish their scams as a source of conflict, and it does further flesh out the Eds as characters. But aside from that, there's not much really going on in this episode. And while Ed, as usual, has some of the best jokes, which isn't many, may I add, it's honestly surprising because an episode about turning Ed into a cool kid has so much comedic potential. But it's just bogged down by unfunny gross out and very bland one-liners. Hyperactive Double D wasn't as funny as I remembered it being, and it has the first of many Canker Ex Machinas. How lovely! This is a very mediocre episode, one that I forgot even existed, and one I will forget again when this video is finished. Moving on.
これが私のハッピーシュガーライフ。
Okay, to be fair, I will give the episode this. The comedy is spot on. There's a lot of laughs to be had here, and it does give us a deeper look at Sarah and Jimmy's friendship with each other. Unfortunately, everything else kind of sucks. Sarah's one-sided infatuation with Double D is more annoying than anything. And it's even more annoying since the Eds aren't doing anything objectively wrong to warrant this. She's just there to ruin things for them while obsessing over Double D, much to the latter's horror. Yeah, I think we've got enough stalkers in this show.
Thank you very much.
Anything else of note from this episode? Well, the baby blue gym sock would appear later in season 5, and Sarah's crush on Double D would be shown one more time much later. That's it. It's just a disposable, annoying episode you can easily skip. Nothing else to say.
I'm gonna wrestle you right here in Stoker.
I feel very mixed on Tag Your Ed. On one hand, it's a good demonstration of the Eds' friendship and how they've got each other's back, and it helps sell the idea that these three are close buddies. On the other hand, the entire beginning is so disconnected from the rest of the episode, one could be mistaken for thinking it belonged to a completely separate episode. And it's once again one of those episodes that just throws in a Canker Ex Machina because they couldn't think of any other way to end it. But hey, at least they appear halfway through the episode as opposed to just the very end. I also thought the fight between Double D and Plank was funny, but it's also where the episode peaks in my opinion. I don't know, this is just a whatever kind of episode. It ain't bad, it ain't good, but I ain't going to remember most of what I've seen either. I guess you could say this is just a painfully average episode.
The fact is, I'm a relic, a symbol of the past.
Honestly, It's Way Ed is probably the definition of an average episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy. I think it captures the hopelessness and pointlessness of trend chasing fairly well, and there are a lot of fun visual gags and creativity with the Eds inventing their own fads. But in the end, I just feel bad for the Eds as they desperately want to fit in. Other than that, there's nothing exceptionally bad, but there's also nothing notably good about it either. I'll sit through it again, but it won't be one I actively seek to rewatch.
Leads us all to wonder, do they live among us?
This episode is higher than It's Way Ed because I like these urban legend episodes a lot more. This time, however, Eddy invents a new cryptid called the Mucky Boys and goes through incredible lengths to convince everyone of their existence. This leads to a lot of great comedy, and I like how the Ed's lie is exposed through simple observation. It's more fitting and not a cop-out like so many episodes featuring the Cankers. Personally, I would have liked it more if it was about them being the Mucky Boys from the very beginning and them causing trouble to avoid getting into trouble. But as is, this is an average episode with just enough to keep it from being forgettable.
Yeah, so impressive. It's like a hotel on the water.
I remember enjoying Avast Ye Eds quite a lot as a wee little fry. It has a nice laid-back attitude about it, a lot of funny moments, and it's just a good example on how creative this show could be with its simple premise, especially in the early days. This episode has a lot of fun with its simple premise. Unfortunately, it's another episode that throws in a Canker Ex Machina as a last-minute threat. But hey, at least they established them early on, and the ending battle with them is entertaining. Until they win, of course. But in any case, it's a fine episode with a lot of fun gags. I just think Camp Lazlo did the DIY cruise concept a lot better. Also, how deep is that creek anyway?
I'm joking! Stop! 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 Stop the brake! Stop! Stop! Stop!
On the most recent viewing, I found Fool on the Ed to be pretty underwhelming. I mean, it's a perfect showcase for the show's physical comedy, and you can feel the Ed's anxiety build as the prank master slowly makes their way towards them. I also feel like it could have better established why the kids united to prank Eddy. Why not make it an April Fool's Day special, and have this be payback for all the previous April Fool's Days? I also found the slapstick to be considerably weaker once we get to the second act of the episode. Also, they say the prank master got everyone, but we never see Naz get pranked.
Wait a minute!
Other than that, it's a perfectly inoffensive episode with a few laughs to be had, but it's just one I don't care about.
It's party time!
Pop goes the Ed. I'll just say it right now. Ed's Hive Be Gone is the worst part of the episode because it has nothing to do with the rest of said episode. Other than that, it's fine. It does a great job portraying what a heat wave is like and establishes the subtle adult humor the show would become known for. And it effectively establishes why the Eds are social outcasts. Unfortunately, this episode also has a lot of awkward humor and cringe comedy, which, if you know me, I absolutely despise. Like I said, it's fine. It has its moments, but there's a reason you don't hear a lot of people talk about this one.
Before his ass was grass.
Sarah gets animal crap lobbed into her face. That automatically makes this episode worth a watch. But in all seriousness, this episode gives us insight on how strict and structured Double D's family life is, and has quite a few funny jokes, with plenty of callbacks to previous episodes. But I also feel like nothing really happens in this episode. It starts, the Eds get into hijinks, then it just ends. I guess I'll just end this segment here because I really don't know what else to say.
But it's becoming increasingly obvious. I can deny it no longer. I am small.
This is another episode I really liked when I was younger. I like how it uses camera angles to show us how tall Eddy sees himself as and how short he really is. And it's also a good display of how much the Eds value their friendship with each other. But other than that, it's pretty dull and only got interesting in the last quarter of the episode. I honestly wish this was just the plot itself and not the shenanigans leading up to it. Also, it's another episode that uses a Canker X Machina. Yay! Okay, to be fair, they were established early on, and they do serve a purpose. It's another okay episode that had the potential to be a lot better, but just didn't.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Sorry, Gem, but this is not the worst episode of Season 1. Sir Adelot is still a funny episode. Eddy's got some of the best lines and jokes in the entire season here, but it also establishes just how clever he is by using the same tactics Sarah used on him to greater effect. And it's just a great example on how the show was so good at turning an ordinary, mundane setting into a fantasy world that a child could play in. With plenty of good slapstick, as expected, but it's also the first episode to establish Sarah and Jimmy's dynamic with each other going forward. But the episode also established Sarah as a character a lot of people wouldn't like. But hey, it did end up establishing the fact that she works better as an antagonist than a pseudo-protagonist. TLDR, it's a good episode, nothing really worth mentioning outside of what I just said. But, before we continue, if you're enjoying the video so far, please be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification button for more great content like this. And if you really want to help my channel out, please consider joining me on Patreon. Every little bit helps to create bigger and better content. But until then, let's continue, shall we?
You can't touch this. You can't touch this.
We've finally made it. The very first episode of Ed, Edd, and Eddy. And for a first episode, it's not that bad. It does a good job at establishing the main characters' personalities and chemistry with one another, as well as the main feel of the show going forward, along with other aspects. But it also takes about half the episode before the plot actually begins, and the animation at points doesn't look as clean as they do in later episodes, even by Season 1 standards. But it's more so to the extent of that one scene in The Incredibles than, say, The Garfield Show. Also, it's implied at one point that Double D may have a crush on Sarah, something that is never shown again and is something that ends up being given to Sarah in some later episodes.
Strange, isn't it?
Kermit.
A Boy and His Ed is one of those episodes I didn't care for when I was younger, but upon rewatch, I actually liked this episode. Almost every joke lands, from the Edodile to the destruction caused by their mistakes. Let's be honest, this is just the better version of Oath to an Ed, because these actually feel like things the Eds would screw up. But this also acts as a double-edged sword of sorts, because the parts where they do try to impress Kevin really slows the episode down, and the punchline becomes very predictable. But hey, it does have a lot more variety than the former. Also, fun fact, Kevin's dad working at the Jawbreaker factory is something that'd be a recurring thing in later episodes after this one. So that's neat. Good episode, slow second half, funny jokes. Just enough to get it a 7 out of 10. Also, why does Kevin wear his hat in the bathtub?
Strange, isn't it?
Button Your Ed has a great concept. What if we take away Eddy's most defining trait, his loud, assertive voice, and see how that weakens him? What do you get? A lot of fun slapstick, with Rolf's antics being the cherry on top of it all. But I also just feel really bad for Eddy throughout, especially since he didn't deserve anything that's happening to him in the episode. In the end, this is, more or less, the Eddy equivalent of cleanliness is next to Edness. But a lot better, don't at me.
Eggs! Eggs! E-double-G-S eggs!
You know, I've always loved those fetch quest episodes. You know, the episodes where a character wants something, but they have to trade it for something else. And as you could guess, I really, really like this episode. It's just joke after joke, and I'm always wanting to see what item they need next and who they would get it from. And kudos to the episode, because each item the character wants fits them perfectly. Of course Rolf wants sawdust. Of course Kevin wants the Eds to paint their shed. Of course Jimmy wants clams. However, I do have one problem, and that would be the ending. Since Ed caused the whole fetch quest to begin with, I find it a little frustrating to see Ed undo all their work through his stupidity, instead of something more fitting like, say, the egg that the Eds get being rotten. But the most egregious problem the episode has is, without a doubt, the clams. I mean, what happened to the clams that fell out of the bucket? What happened to the clams? In all seriousness, this was a fun episode with enough charm and humor to make it an episode I'd happily rewatch any time.
Is there a doctor in the house? Is there a doctor in the house?
You know, in hindsight, this was an obvious episode to make. I think we all had a friend that had an allergy to something and may have needed attention for it at one point. And since this is not a grounded series, I can see a lot of people relating to this episode, with the funny gags and jokes throughout being an added bonus. Other than that, the episode felt a bit aimless as it went from one thing to another with no real resolution. But hey, the rabbits do at least make a cameo later on. That's something worth noting. But since there's only a few of them as opposed to a literal ocean, I'm assuming they just ate the rest of them. Fun episode, not much else to say.
Yep, it's haunted.
Haunted?
You're positive?
Yep, it's got the mark of the beast.
Revealing one embarrassing snapshot of SpongeBob at the Christmas party!
Now this is a great setup. The Eds find a camera and decide to take embarrassing pictures of the other kids in order to make a calendar, while Double D treats it like they're on a safari. I am just in sheer awe at the amount of jokes they came up with using the same basic setup and punchline. Usually, this would be a hindrance to any episode, but the variety in how that punchline is delivered is quite admirable. Sure, it's another episode that ends with a canker ex machina, but it's more like how it is in A Pinch to Grow an Ed. They at least serve a purpose, don't molest them, and the ultimate punishment does fit the crime. And this episode did have an undeniable impact going forward. It introduced Eddy's attic, Victor, and both would be seen a few times throughout the series. And some elements would appear again in the misadventures. Outside of the cankers, the episode is nearly perfect, and I will give it this. The Eds were taking selfies before anyone else, which meant they were already decades ahead of the other children. So yeah, the ending of It's Way Ed is even worse now. I wouldn't call this one of my favorite episodes, but it would be one of the episodes I'd recommend to someone who is new to the series.
Start spreading the news.
Ah yes, sometimes the simplest of situations can make for the most fun. And Read All About Ed is a perfect example of that. This is an episode that relies mostly on the chemistry between the three main characters, as well as how each one goes about their daily duties and how they solve or cause problems. Sure, it's another episode that doesn't resolve its conflict by the end, but it's one that definitely has a well-earned place in my heart. Also, did anyone else used to think the ink was the character's color palette being washed away?
Stupid! You're so stupid!
Welcome to our club! Welcome to our club! Welcome Squidward! Welcome Squidward! Welcome Squidward! Welcome Squidward! Welcome Squidward!
Vertigo is one of those episodes that's less of a story, but more so a showcase of how many gags they can do with the premise alone. And let me tell you, this is easily one of the funniest episodes of the series.
This is a perfect spot, huh guys?
Hey, dorks! Get out of my backyard!
Weird. Kevin already has a clubhouse here. Shut up, Ed.
So much of the physical comedy lands with a definite laugh, and it's impressive with how many of these genuinely hilarious jokes they crammed into 11 minutes. Yes, it's another episode where the Cankers come out of nowhere and exist solely to ruin the Ed's plans. But I feel like it's a bit more excusable here, since, once again, it's still really funny. But still, had it not been for them, this episode could have easily been one of the few episodes I'd give this season that rare 10 out of 10. However, before we do get to the 10 out of 10s, we have one more Kanker Ex Machina to get through.
Your mind belongs to me. Breathe.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together. I really loved this episode as a kid, and it certainly holds up. The Ed's hypnotizing people is such a genius concept, and the hypnotizing wheel offers so much comedic potential. And the episode utilizes that potential to its fullest. Kevin is a monkey, Rolf is various movie monsters, Plank is...
What have you done? Plank is a mindless zombie! No!
I don't know what, and Jimmy being a muscle man are all just small examples of how great this episode was in terms of its jokes. Speaking of muscle man Jimmy, can I just say that this is the better version of the Boomerang episode? With that episode, I have a few problems with it, while here I only have one major problem. I already said it, the Kanker Ex Machina. But much like Quick Shot Ed, at least they serve a purpose in stopping the Eds from taking over everyone's minds. And Lee being unable to be hypnotized because of her hair is a clever way for this to backfire on them. Also, I will never understand why Johnny wasn't hypnotized the first time, but was the second time. Weird. Like I said, this is a solid episode, and it's one I'll happily rewatch anytime.
Just cram, okay? We're closed for Ebola.
Now this is a classic episode. In a similar vein to Button Your Ed, it takes away something integral to Eddy's character, and see how it changes him. This time around, making the cul-de-sac kid sick and depriving him of his daily fix of scamming. The result? Eddy goes nuts and the others need to catch him. As you can imagine, this leads to a lot of great gags and antics. Eddy gambling with the squirrels is easily one of the most iconic scenes in the entire show, let alone a lot of the other jokes you end up seeing throughout the episode. Though, living in a post-2020 world, this episode hits very differently now. The only real nitpick I have is how they didn't see the quarantine signs beforehand, but that's not an issue. I don't have much else to say other than it's a solid episode, and only one of 4 episodes that managed to garner a 10 out of 10 rating for this season. Oh yeah, when I said this season was pretty solid, I mean it.
Are you crazy? Let's hide behind the chainsaws.
I believe Ed and Seek is one of only 2 episodes this season that captures the simple joys of being a kid. Specifically, the simple fun that was hide and seek. But despite its simplicity, it has plenty of good jokes and visual gags, and the hiding places are creative. Almost makes you wish these were places you could hide in IRL. And it even got suspenseful at times when they were looking for people, or the people were looking for them. Like I've said, this is just a very simple, very charming episode that brings back a familiar nostalgia to those simpler times when we were young.
Close your eyes, shut your mouth, dream a dream and get us out. Dream, 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 dream.
Once again, a very simple premise with a lot of comedic potential that it takes full advantage of. Ed sleepwalking and eating everyone's food is probably one of the funniest and most in-character things Ed has done in the show. Eddy has some of the most surreal lines that I still don't understand today, but still chuckle at, and you know that the show is genuinely great with its writing when it can make someone being eaten alive funny.
Good thing I'm a man of the world.
And a few elements of this episode would appear in a few later episodes. It's even one of the few times the Eds come out on top, so that's even neater. Also, nice reference with the energy drinks. Needless to say, this is a prime example of Ed, and Eddy at their peak when it came to creativity. Is what I would say if it weren't for one other episode. Yeah, this was an obvious pick. It does what Sir Ed-a-Lot was trying to do, and did it 7 times better. It captures the imagination that children have really well, and it's fun to watch them turn the junkyard into their own personal playground, enraptured in their game so much that after a while, I forgot it was even a game they were playing. Also, this line is so true.
Don't worry, Ed. We'll see it on TV in a year.
Yeah, with all the good stuff cut out.
Speaking of which, this episode introduces the Junkyard, a location important in many later episodes. And this episode would also become the basis of a level in the Misadventures. Also, it's one of the few times the Cankers were actually forced into retreating. That automatically makes it a great episode in my book. Without a doubt, Dawn of the Eds is easily the best episode of Season 1, by a country mile. And that was Season 1 of Ed, and Eddy. Like I said, all in all, it was a great start for what would be one of Cartoon Network's most popular and famous shows. I am glad to have revisited this, if anything, to see how the most important show of my childhood started off. And I can tell you right now, I am excited to remember just how much better it can only get from here. Overall, I give this season an 8 out of 10. And I hope more people will continue to give this classic a chance and discover their own misadventures. Hi guys, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button for future content. And if you want to support the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon and PayPal. Links are in the description below. And until next time, I will see you guys later.